Hey, I'm Adam.
And I'm Brian.
Of Everyone Has a Podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 306, The Best Narrated Movies. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. This week we thought it might be fun to take a look at some of our personal favorite narrated movies. So films with a voiceover narration as a key part of the movie. But before we get to our top 5 lists, what pop culture have you been able to take in over the past few weeks, Derek? We've had a break for a bit.
Yeah, we have actually.
Yeah.
It's been a while, and I did some traveling, which was a big part of why we weren't on the show. And whenever I have a chance to fly on an airplane, I do one of two things: I have a nap, or I watch a movie,
or both.
I usually do both. Yeah.
Right.
So I have had a chance to watch a bunch of stuff. I'm going to skip over a few things, not dwell on them. So, like for example, while I was on the plane, I rewatched The Silence of the Lambs because I just listened to a podcast about that.
Oh, wow!
Again. Funny story, not so haha funny. This is a movie that I didn't actually see in the theater. I think I first saw it in like 2002, like years, like a decade after it came out. I never really had any desire to see it. Nothing about it really jumped out at me. I wasn't familiar with the book, and everyone's like, oh, it's the best movie ever. It won all the Oscars. And I was just sort of like, God, there's no way it's going to live up to the hype. And then I remember watching it going, oh my God, this is actually really good. And I hadn't seen it in probably 5 years or more. So when I had this opportunity to listen to this podcast about it, I thought, I'm going to go back and watch the movie first. And then of course the podcast was that much better because the movie was fresh. So again, it was a good revisit of they were doing thrillers for the month of October. So it was an interesting revisit.
Cool.
And then on the plane, I watched one of my guilty pleasure movies, Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds, which, I loved. So I just put it on and I watched that. There again, we don't have to talk too much about that. I had a chance to watch a couple of movies. I watched one that was pretty much like brand new and one that's really old. And I can't remember what the really old one, if I talked about it last week. If I have, just say you've talked about it, we'll move on. It's a movie called Hardcore with George C. Scott from like the 70s. Did you ever see that one?
I think you mentioned that a little while ago that you had seen that movie.
Yeah, it was one of the podcasts was doing a while back. They had done an episode, and I thought, I never heard of this movie. And then I saw it came up on my 70s channel, and I'm like, oh, I'll record it. And the premise, again, it was from the 70s, and it was one of the first mainstream Hollywood movies to address like the pornography industry.
George C. Scott's daughter gets sucked into the world of porno.
Yes,
maybe that's
exactly
bad terminology.
That's exactly it. Yeah,
she gets sucked into it.
Sucked in,
but she got involved in the pornography world, and then I think he goes trying to find her or something.
Yeah,
the thing I remember was he's interviewing people. And he's
he pretends to be a porno producer because he's got a lead on who, he basically gets this not snuff film because she's not dead, but he gets this into this 8mm film of his daughter engaged in sexual activity with these two gentlemen, and he has pictures of the guys. So he pretends to be a producer director, and he's doing auditions. So he has all of these guys come in because he's trying to find the guy in the picture because he thinks it'll be a lead to his daughter.
And the best thing I remember the scene where he's got them all, and then the one guy's whatever, he auditions and he's like, no, you're not good for this movie. And the guy's like, what do you mean? I got so I always remember that line from that film. I don't know why.
Anyway, it's a movie. It's very much dated. It's of its time.
Oh, sure.
It's an interesting sort of time capsule piece. And again, it's certainly not your feel good Saturday night movie, but it was an interesting, piece of Americana from the 70s. So I had a chance to watch that. Had a chance to watch the new M. Night Shyamalan movie that came out last year. It's called Trap. It was on one of the streamers, maybe Amazon probably, but I don't know. Chris, do you know anything about this at all?
Nope.
Have you even heard about it?
Nope. I haven't even heard of it. He's been making movies for a couple of years now that I didn't even know. They just all fly under the radar. They're all crap.
Yeah, it's so this one, I want to say Josh Hartnett, I believe, is the lead, and it's basically and this isn't giving too much away because you get all of this in the first like 3 minutes of the movie. So he's a single dad. He's bringing his daughter to what's essentially a Taylor Swift concert. And when he gets there, he sees like there's a lot of extra security, but you think, okay, this performer is supposed to be like basically like Taylor Swift. So you're like, okay, that's why all this security's here. And then when he gets in the building, he finds himself in a situation where he's talking to one of the vendors and he's like, hey, what's with all the security? And they go, oh, do you know that serial killer, blah, blah, blah. The cops have a lead that he's going to be at this concert. So nobody's going to be allowed to leave until they verify everyone's identity, and they think they're going to catch him. And then he goes to the restroom and he pulls out his mobile phone and he looks at like a video, and he's got a guy chained up in his basement who he's been torturing, and you realize, oh my God, he's the serial killer. But he's there with his daughter, and you're like, well, where's this gonna go? And so it's like this cat and mouse thriller where he's trying to avoid detection, and most of it's shot here in Toronto at the Rogers Centre, formerly called Sky Dome. So for me, I'm seeing a lot of them. I know exactly where that is. So yeah, the first half is about that, and then spoiler alert, he manages to elude capture, and the second half is sort of like once they realize he's gone, how do they try and follow him and stuff? And I thought it was pretty good. I really liked it. I've recommended it to a few people. Some have liked it more than others. I mean, it's no Sixth Sense, don't get me wrong, but no, the performances were pretty decent. I really liked the way that they did the whole cat and mouse chase through the stadium. I enjoyed it. I mean, if you've got the streamer and you see it show up, it's called Trap. I would say give it a watch. It was pretty good.
This sounds familiar. Like I feel like you might have mentioned.
I think I talked about it when the trailer came out like 6 months ago, and
maybe it was a trailer you were talking about.
Yeah,
it sounds familiar.
This sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. So
good.
And then after all this time, I finally had a chance to watch a documentary.
For 40 days and 40 nights, he watches documentaries. He likes to learn about the world. It's Derek's Documentaries. Derek's Documentaries.
It's been a couple weeks. I hope you watch a documentary.
Well, yeah, I just haven't had the time, energy, desire to find any. Like sometimes you look in the preview menu and you're like, oh my God, here's 3 amazing documentaries. Can't wait to watch. But anyway, the one I watched is on Amazon. It came out last year. It's called Remembering Gene Wilder. And it's essentially a biography of Gene Wilder. But they must have been shooting this for a while, or they had archival footage, because he actively sort of narrates and talks about his life in direct interview. It's not just someone going, and Gene Wilder was a great performer. Here's a clip of him on a show. I mean, there was a lot of that in there, but there's a lot of it where I guess as he was, because he died from illness. I want to say it was cancer, if I remember correctly. But it's like he obviously knew he was sick, and I think he was participating in these kinds of things to sort of archive his life and leave some sort of a legacy. Honestly, I didn't really know much about him other than the movies he did through the 80s, the 70s and 80s, right? Like he was in Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, and then he did a bunch of movies with Richard Pryor. Like that. That's sort of the extent of my knowledge of his, and Willy Wonka.
The producers
obviously.
And Willy Wonka. I mean, he was amazing.
Yeah. And so watching this documentary, I mean, obviously, like any biography, the first half an hour is sort of the person, they were born in the small town of blah, blah, blah. So you get like their upbringing, and then they finally get their big break. And obviously he was really good friends with Mel Brooks. And so Mel Brooks is interviewed in this a lot. A lot of the people that he worked with and had professional relationships with that are still alive, because I mean, obviously he was an older man when he died, are in this, and they speak so fondly of him and so highly of him. And he seemed like he was just a genuinely decent guy all around, and everyone who knew him spoke so highly of him in this documentary. And it was an interesting visit.
He was such a unique performer, almost genius in a way. The stuff he did, he was great.
I didn't realize that he wrote Young Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
Like and it was like, oh, okay.
So he really fought for that scene when they sing.
Yeah,
they
put
do
it on the Ritz.
Yeah. And Mel Brooks didn't want to put it in. He's like, you're crazy. This is stupid idea. And Gene Wilder fought like crazy to get in the movie. And it's, probably the most remembered scene in the film.
And they said even when they were shopping it around, everyone was like, oh, yeah, Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder want to do this. That's great. And then they go, by the way, we want to do it in black and white, because it's sort of a send up and an homage to those old classic monster films. And they said like the studios were not having any of it. And they're like, well, then fine, we're leaving. And then finally they got the permission to do it in black and white from the studio that ultimately picked it up. And they said 3 other studios passed on it. And believe me, they are all kicking themselves given how much money it made, even way back then in the 70s. So,
and I mean, anyway, I was a big fan of hers too, but Terry Garr was never more beautiful than she was in that film. She was just so adorable. Oh man, she was awesome too. That was a good movie. You know,
and she just passed away too. R.I.P.
Very recently. Yep.
Yeah, since we did our last show. So anyway, yeah, no, it was decent. If Gene Wilder's someone you're interested in learning a little more about, it's called Remembering Gene Wilder. It's I want to say it's on Amazon, and the documentary just came out last year, so you should be able to have no problem finding it.
Okay, so I got something for you. So long story short, I watched a couple of newer movies, newer for me. Okay. So my wife's birthday was recently, and so what I did was she works really hard at her job, so I wanted to do something special for her. So I actually surprised her by sending her and a friend of hers, this other girl that she works with, on a long weekend trip to the Bahamas. So my wife was really surprised. Yeah, she was really surprised. And like, oh my God, this is so great. And, so I sent them off and off they go. So that means I'm not stuck here, but I mean, I stayed here in Canada. And so I got the boys with me. So my youngest son is like, oh, good daddy. This means we can watch movies together. Like, we can have a boys' night. We can order pizza and watch movies. Okay. I'm like, you get to pick whatever movie you want. But, I'd really like us to watch like Meatballs, or My Bodyguard or something like that. And they're like, no. So I'm like, okay, then you pick it. So the first night, we had 2 nights over the weekend. Friday night, we watched Meg 2, The Trench.
Ugh, it was terrible.
It's friggin' terrible. I'm like, and my son's like, oh, this is so good. I'm like, oh yeah, it's great.
You are your mother's child.
Oh man. So it was awful. So the second night, I'm like, okay, you get to pick the movie again. I tried to get him to watch Meatballs. Wouldn't do it. So okay, pick the movie again. So he picked Jurassic World. And I'm like, well, could we not watch like Jurassic Park from 93? It's better. He's like, no, it isn't. The dinosaurs are way better in Jurassic World. The special effects are better. I watched Jurassic World with my son. I disagree.
I also disagree.
I think the special effects from the 93 one were better.
I agree.
I don't know, man. Like all this talk of advances with CGI and stuff, and no, I don't see it. I just still think 93's was better. So I watched 2 sort of monster movies, I guess you could say, that are relatively new. Meg 2, The Trench, and Jurassic World. The only thing is Bryce Dallas Howard was in it, and she's just unbelievably gorgeous. And so I'm watching this, and I'm like, and I said to my son, I've had him watch Happy Days. Right. So he's like, oh, he really likes Happy Days, right? And so I said, do you know who that is? He's like, no. I said, that's Richie Cunningham's daughter. He's like, no way. I'm like, yep, that is Ron Howard's daughter. So it was a little bit of education both ways. He made me watch newer movies, and I was able to tie it all back together, to that. So anyway, also got this.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
Well, I figured we're doing narrated movies this week, so I guess it would be good if I did a narrator joke.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Okay, so knock, knock.
Who's there?
Unreliable narrator.
Unreliable narrator who?
That's not what I said.
I don't get it.
Is there any chance you might have a documentary for us this week?
Derek Stocks, party time, excellent.
Colonel Sanders.
Slow down there, Chris.
Was he finger licking good?
Oh, my.
I can think of 11 reasons not to like that.
2 of which are salt and pepper.
Oh, I heard about this.
Oh my God, I don't know if we can be friends anymore.
But I appreciate the effort.
Back the truck up, hold it.
More than just white dudes.
2 of my favorite things, Star Wars and beer. So Derek, our producer, cut us off there by jumping right to were you going to say something else about my narrator?
I said, I don't get it, said the narrator.
Oh, very good. I like it. Okay, so my friend, you came up with the idea for this week's top 5 list. So maybe you can explain a little bit about why you liked this idea as a topic. I mean, and maybe any parameters that you thought we should put in place for our list. So why don't you set the stage for us here?
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea of a movie narrator is nothing new. The movies have done this on and off for a long time. And a lot of people criticize it. They feel it's a lazy storytelling technique. And honestly, in many cases, it is. There are many better ways to inform your audience of what's going on The old, like, I took a lot of creative writing, and they always say, show me, don't tell me. And the narrator is literally telling you. And there are so many films where, if they just put a little more effort into the storytelling aspect of it, you wouldn't need this voiceover to fill in the blanks. And we've talked about this with things like science fiction movies, where sometimes I'll have all these, wrestling my brain with these topics of like, well, why is this happening? Why isn't that happening? Like, and I'll even say, why don't they just have one of the characters say, I'm glad we invented the blah, blah, blah that lets us do this thing. And that's all I need. Like, you don't need a narrator going, the reason that they can do this is because in the year blah blah they invented da 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 da. It's like just have it come up through the course of the story. But there are some very clever and creative writers and storytellers who use the narrator in a clever or creative way. And I think many of the movies on our list will talk about different ways where it's actually used effectively. Sometimes you'll have like, a character in the movie literally narrating the movie themselves. Sometimes you'll just have the voice of God overhead telling you what's going on. And in some cases, again, I don't know what's on your list, but one of the movies that almost made my list was Blade Runner. Blade Runner has a very huge cult following. It came out in 1982, and originally there was a voiceover. And then 10 years later, Ridley Scott did a director's cut where he completely removed the voiceover. And you had two very polarized schools of fans where some people feel the movie needs the narrator, it adds to it. Other people feel that the movie is strong enough that it never needed that voiceover. And without the voiceover, certain elements are left to the imagination of the viewer. So again, it's interesting how some movies have really, really taken advantage of that idea of using the narrator in that kind of way. The other sort of rule that I had suggested that you and I do when we're doing this is some movies have a voiceover at the beginning and or a voiceover at the end just to sort of start and end the movie.
Right, like bookends for the story.
Yeah, like, and so I'm thinking like an example is like American Beauty. Kevin Spacey has a little voiceover at the beginning where he sort of sets the stage. He tries to say like, this looks like typical suburban America, but really more is going on. And then I think at the end, there's some of that as well. But through the course of the movie, there's none of that. And so I suggested that as we put together our list, since we're only going to talk about 5 movies a piece, let's just put those ones aside. Again, usually you don't even need that narrator. It doesn't usually add that much to the movie. I want to talk about movies where the narrator is going on and on through huge portions of the movie. Maybe not in the entire thing, but that was sort of my other parameter. And again, there are different ways to accomplish this, which I'm sure we'll talk about through the course of our podcast.
So we decided that we would format it as a top 5 list for each of us. But and we've done this before where we each agree there's a clear cut, no question, number 1. And then we just go ahead and acknowledge that right off the top. So you and I both agreed that there's one movie that is the best ever narrated movie. And so our list will actually be the next 5.
Yeah, really, this is a top 2 to 6 instead of a top 1 to 5 because we agree the number 1 movie. There's no question.
So, Derek, you want to reveal the number 1 narrated movie that we both agree is the best ever?
Oh, it's The Shawshank Redemption. Yeah. Like head and shoulders above the rest. There's no like you ask people what their favorite movie of all time is. Probably 5 out of 10 people or more are going to say The Shawshank Redemption. And so to ask people what their favorite movie with a narrator is, again, nothing comes close. There's a few others that are approaching that, but Shawshank's a number 1, hands down. No one else is in that class.
Morgan Freeman's narration in that movie is the gold standard. It really is. Just that calm, steady, straightforward way he just tells the story. His voiceover was so good. Remember they got him right after that. They got him to narrate a documentary, The March of the Penguins.
Yes. Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, his narration. But also, Derek, he also had this to say. Listen up.
Pop Goes Your World is the best podcast ever.
So just so you know.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. So do you want to start us off with your number 5 and we'll work your way up to number 1, keeping in mind that The Shawshank Redemption is really the number 1. We both agree on that.
Yeah.
So number 5, What do you got?
So number 5 for me is one of my guilty pleasure movies. I love this movie. I've probably seen it 20 times. It is certainly not going to win any Oscars. It is the movie Limitless starring Bradley Cooper.
Oh, I Chris, don't even know it. I don't even know what this is.
All right. I unfortunately I didn't do all my homework. I don't have the year the movie came out, but I think it came out in like the 2010, 11, 12, somewhere in that neighborhood. So it's about 10 years old. And the idea is that Bradley Cooper's character, through a series of events that happen in the first 10 minutes, gets his hands on these magic pills, and as he takes the pills, they make him a super genius, essentially giving him superpowers, for lack of something better way to describe it. And this opens up his brain to be able to do all sorts of ridiculously amazing computations and calculations. And then, of course, he becomes a stockbroker and he tries to make money off it. And Robert De Niro is the villainous, money guy who hires him to try and make him rich, and other things just start to come into play. It's a little silly and goofy in parts, but it's essentially a superhero movie that doesn't identify itself as a superhero movie, because they basically give him like unlimited knowledge, and he gets perfect recall of anything he's ever read, and he's able to connect the dots in ways that he could never do before. Like at one point he gets in a fight and he's like, well, I've never, and again, he narrates the whole movie, right? And he says like, well, I've never been in a street fight, but I've seen every Bruce Lee movie. And because he's seen those movies, he can recall how Bruce Lee moved, because he has total recall now, and he can like fight like Bruce Lee. And it's like, come on, it's more that, anyway, like I said, some of the plot is a little silly and a little goofy, but I just love watching this movie. It's fun. It's a fun movie. But because it's got this X factor, this goofy pill thing, I keep calling it goofy. I mean, it's they try and make it very scientific. It's this NZT, it's this special drug that's not on the market because you don't want everyone being a genius. Only special people can have it. And so Bradley Cooper is narrating the story to explain it. Now, one of the tropes that I'm sure we'll get into with narration is often the narrator at the start of the movie will tease you with something. And that's how this movie starts. He's about to jump off a building because guys are chasing him. And he's like, I don't want to put up with the torture of these guys. I'm going to just jump off the building and kill myself. That's my only way out. Or is it? And then it goes like, 2 months earlier, and he starts talking about how I was just a regular guy, and then I got these pills, and now I'm a super brainiac. And so through the course of the movie, he has to explain, right? Well, what are these pills, and why do they help him, and why aren't they helping other people? And as he bumps into people, he's like, oh, I remember this guy. He was my ex-wife's cousin's brother's roommate, and that's why I know him. And oh, look, he's got this stash of pills. And it's like, again, it's a little bit of lazy storytelling. And there are probably better ways you could have connected these dots for the viewers, but this is certainly the fastest and easiest way. And when the movie's got Bradley Cooper, looking his greatness on screen, people don't want to waste 20 minutes of character development. Just have Bradley Cooper tell me, I got these magic pills and now I'm super smart and I can do all sorts of cool stuff. Okay, Bradley, what's next? Oh, well, they're making me hallucinate. Oh, okay, this is interesting. So anyway, I enjoy the movie Limitless a lot. I don't think it would work without the narration. I think that they rely on it almost a little too much as a crutch, but I'm okay with that. That's the best part about guilty pleasures is you don't have to justify why you like them. You just say you like them and you move on. So my number 5 pick, or I guess technically my number 6 pick, is Limitless.
Okay, my number 5 is a personal favorite as well. It's much older than yours. It's from 1984, and that's The Lonely Guy. So when you talk about hidden gem movies, this one ranks right up there for me. It's not one of those movies you instantly think about when it comes to 80s comedies. In fact, I bet you most people have never even seen it or even know that it exists.
I've never even heard of it.
Okay. For me, though, at least, it ranks right up at the top of Steve Martin's best work. It's so funny. Oh, my God. So Steve Martin is Larry Hubbard. He's a writer who works at Hallmark, writing greeting cards. But he wants to write a book. Right. But in his personal life, he just can't meet a girl. He's lonely and he's living in New York City, and he starts to realize there's a lot of guys out there that can't meet a girl. And his best friend is Charles Grodin.
Okay.
It is the best performance of Charles Grodin's career. He is so good. He's like this deadpan schlub who's lonely and just totally morose. And the scenes between them, you can totally tell the director just basically said, just started rolling the cameras and was like, just improvise, guys. Just go ahead. And oh my God, it's so funny. But the narration, so Steve Martin narrates the film and basically walks you through what it's like to be lonely and not be able to meet your soulmate. And it strings together what basically amounts to just a bunch of skits about being lonely. So the movie starts out with a different voice narrating it. And then Steve Martin walks out on screen and he breaks the fourth wall. And he says, that's okay. I got it. I got the narration from here. And his on-screen character takes it over, the narration. But the movie is so good. It's like charming and it's sweet, but mostly it's just really funny. Oh my God. The scene with Merv Griffin in it. Oh, jeez. Just so good. But like I say, it's Steve Martin narrating this film. He just walks you through. He just ties it all together. So without his narration, it would just come off like a series of little sketches. But for me, the narration pulls the whole movie together. So it's my number 5. So that's mine. And you'd never even heard of it, eh?
No, I never. No, I never heard of it before.
It's so good. We'll have to watch it sometime.
Right.
I'll get us to do it as I'll get us to review it here sometime for sure. Okay, what's your number 4?
So, arguably, if you ask people the best movie, they're going to say Shawshank. But I think a lot of people are going to lean on one of 2 movies from Scorsese. They're going to go to Goodfellas is probably going to be their first pick. But for people who are maybe a little younger, they may lead on Casino. Both of the, and I'm going to sort of cheat and put those both together as my number 4 pick. I know it's 2 movies, but it's more the way that Scorsese has framed those movies in very similar ways, where he has the characters in the movie do the narration, and through the course of the movie, he even changes them. Like for Goodfellas, you have Henry Hill doing a lot of the narration, but then it changes to his wife for part of it. And with Casino, you have Robert De Niro's character, the narrator. Then you have Joe Pesci's character, the narrator. Like he flips back and forth depending on what's going on. And one of the things we haven't really talked about yet, but again, I'm sure we're going to get into a little more, is as a viewer watching these movies and you have a character giving you the narration, you need to sort of understand, am I supposed to believe everything the narrator's telling me? Are they the omniscient narrator and they're telling me factually what is happening? Or am I getting the point of view of the character who is actually talking, which may not necessarily include all truths from a neutral third-party perspective? And I find that with Scorsese's movies, that's definitely a big part of it, because you have the different characters giving you narration. In some cases, they'll talk about the same events, but they'll describe them a little differently, because obviously
it's like Kurosawa did that in Rashomon.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfectly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for me, of the 2, I mean, and this is maybe considered some blasphemous by some people, but I actually like Casino better. Maybe that's just because I'm a gambler and I like Vegas. And Casino is a movie that when it came out, I was able to see it in the theater. I was I was in like my late teens, early 20s, whereas Goodfellas, when it came out, I sort of missed it and I had to come back to it on video. So if I had to literally pick the one, I would go with Casino. And again, it's this, anytime you're getting a movie where in this case it's about like the behind the scenes in Las Vegas, it's a period piece that takes place way back when it was younger in the Vegas life cycle. You need to bring your audience up to speed, much like you might in a science fiction movie. These are the people on the spaceship, blah blah blah, heading towards planet X. You need to set up expectations. And if you're going to tell this story that takes place in a location that people aren't familiar with, in a time period people maybe aren't familiar with, then you need to give them a little shorthand. And in this case, with Scorsese stuff, he does it so well. I don't feel that he needs it as a crutch here. I think that it's an integral part to the way he's telling his story in both of these films. But I think in Casino, I think he does it even better. I think the narration is just perfect. It's almost present in every single scene, and like considering Casino's like almost 3 hours, like that's a lot of narration. But it's almost like you're getting 2 movies. You're getting the movie that you're watching, and you're also getting the running commentary by the character that you're watching in the film. So I think that that Scorsese has done this very well in both films. But my number 4 pick would be Casino.
That's good. My number 4, no surprise, go back to the 80s. I'm going back to 1985. I'm going with Fletch.
Yeah,
So,
I would have been shocked if this was not.
yeah, I mean, this movie is Chevy Chase, right? It's like, it's just him doing that smart aleck kind of character. It feels like that's who Chevy Chase is,
Yeah, or was at the time.
Yeah, like, so the movie opens up obviously with him narrating it, and he introduces himself, to the audience, and then throughout the film there's narration. It's important to the story too, because at times there's a lot going on. And there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle he's trying to solve. So I feel like the narration just keeps the audience, up on things. So I like it. The narration and the film together, it makes for a lot of Chevy Chase. But I think that's kind of the point of the film, right? It's a huge vehicle for him. We reviewed this movie here on the podcast, and, we both liked it. It's a favorite, both of ours. I love at the very end when he says, I charged the entire vacation to Mr. Underhill's American Express card. Want the number? It's just like, it just kind of adds to that whole, punctuates, his personality and stuff. But in this film, it's the narration that for me helps. It develops the character, but it moves the story forward. And I think the movie wouldn't be the same without it. So I think it's important. So that's my number 4.
Yeah, and the thing with Fletch is because it's a detective story, like that harkens back to the film noirs from the 40s, 50s, where you had a lot of detective stories where you had, again, they want to make sure in a detective story that by the time you get the big reveal at the end, like who did it or where was the stolen money, you want to make sure the audience is along for the ride and that it's not like, here's the reveal and the audience is like, how the hell did you get from point A to point B? I'm not following. Mm-hmm. And the narration is a good way to provide that sort of shorthand to the audience. Like, hey, did you get it? This guy was really working for that guy. And so as the character in the story discovers it, the narration just sort of hits you over the head with it. And I think with a movie like Fletch, again, because you may get lost up in some of the Chevy Chase of it all, the comedy, the slapstick, the goofy disguises, the funny voices, the false teeth, the whatever you're going to do. At its heart, it's still a detective story. Like the character Fletch is based on a detective from a series of novels. Now, obviously, I don't believe that the novels have him be quite as goofy as I keep using that word tonight, that Chevy Chase is in the movie. But I think any good detective story, you need to make sure your audience is keeping up. So I like that with Fletch, you do get that voiceover to just remind you, like, he is on the job. He is looking for clues. He is trying to solve a mystery. And by him reinforcing that in and after each scene, when you do finally get the payoff at the end about like what's really going on, there's a good chance that if you've been paying attention, you've figured it out before it's spelled out for you. But if you haven't, when it is finally spelled out for you, you can sort of go, okay, I get it. I see that. Based on what you've laid out, that now makes sense. It wasn't out of left field like, he was really a woman in disguise all along. And you're like, well, it would have been nice to have some clues. It's like, no, they spelled it out. So anyway.
I'm glad you mentioned those old detective movies because it really does tap into that. Like some of those old ones, like they overdid it. Like they would just spell out everything. Like, like the narration would be like, I lit up a cigarette and I looked over at her. Yeah. And I found she was pretty hot. Like a pizza in an oven. I wanted to be. No, maybe not. I don't know. But like they would just walk you through everything. How long was
your wife away on vacation?
Exactly. Okay.
That'll be in the next drop for sure.
Yeah, it'll get censored. It's all good. All right. Okay, so your number 3, what do you got?
All right, my number 3, again, my last pick and this pick, easy picks. But trust me, my 1 and 2 are going to be unexpected. My number 3 pick is Fight Club. And you want to talk about an unreliable narrator? This is a textbook. This is a master's class on how to do it. So if you haven't seen Fight Club, I'll tell you right now, there's some twists and turns and spoilers. And if you want to watch it and not be spoiled, then you should, fast forward this podcast 5 minutes. But honestly, the movie's been out 25 years. If you haven't seen it by now, too bad. We're spoiling it. So in Fight Club, you get the character, and they literally in the credits call him narrator because they never identify him by name. But Edward Norton's character narrates the whole movie, and he talks about what his job is and what his life is like, and as he meets the rebels and they start the actual literal fight club, and there's all that stuff, and how he meets Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt's character, and he's telling you what's going on. But as the movie progresses, he talks about having blackouts and not remembering how and why things happened or how did I get here or why did this happen? So again, you have the narrator, and maybe he's not so much unreliable as much as he's just not as informed as you would expect a narrator to be. So as his character is experiencing confusion, he's vocalizing that through the voiceover so that you, the audience member, are also going, oh yeah, how did he get here? But through the course of what he says, there, again, it's got a twist ending, sort of there's a big reveal. He does spell it out. It's just like any other good storyteller. When you go back and watch it that second time, once you know how it ends, all the pieces are there. In many cases, they literally say them out loud as a part of the narration. But in the context, they don't necessarily make sense because you don't have the full picture. Fight Club, on its own, I believe, is a fantastic movie. I've read the book. I've seen the movie a dozen times. I love it. Guys of a certain age, this is going to be in the top 5 movies of all time. It's just it's just part of the way that certain men's brains work. But from a narrator point of view, I really like this one. I really like the idea that he finds in the course of the movie, he finds a series of old books where he even says, he goes, the author's written these medical journals from the point of view of the body parts. So he's like, I am Jack's colon, I am Jack's brain, I am Jack's heart. And so the narrator even sort of adopts that sort of storytelling. Once he discovers those books in the movie, the way he narrates sort of changes to match that. So it's a really interesting way of just taking what could have otherwise been just a boring idea, a boring trope of, here's a guy narrating what's happening in case you're not paying attention. Are you on your phone? Okay, well, he'll tell you what's happening. You don't even have to watch the movie. No. He's doing a two things at once kind of thing. You really got to both pay attention to what your eyes are seeing and listen to what the narrator's telling you, because there's so many clues sort of so you can pick up what's happening. Fight Club and all, it's just generally a great movie, but from the voiceovers, it's definitely in my top 5, no question.
There you go. Okay, so surprise of all surprises, my number 3 comes from the 80s. We reviewed this movie at the end of season 8. I remember we did a bunch of holiday movies around Christmas last year, and I mentioned that I thought this was the near perfect movie. You thought I was a bit of a stretch, but I'm talking about A Christmas Story from 1983. Okay. I think it is pretty much perfect. And one of the things that I like the best about this movie is the narration. It's a very heavily narrated movie, but it just works, So the narrator was Gene Shepard, and he wrote a series of short stories, and they put it together into a book that was called In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash. And the book was basically used as the framework for this script. But not only was he an author, but Gene Shepard was like a longtime radio host. He did this show out of WOR radio from 30 Rock in New York, and he was a storyteller on the radio, and he gained a pretty big audience doing that. He was just a perfect fit for him to do the narration for this movie, and it just works so well. It sort of ties the whole movie together. Like, he's got this unique sounding voice, and he just injects so much enthusiasm into his speaking when he's talking about that excitement of, Christmas as a child. Mm-hmm. And, it's from the point of view of the child who's now grown up and telling the story. And they use this narrative device in the Wonder Years too. And I liked it there. It works really well. So Christmas Story is my number 3.
Yeah, I would say that's a good pick. I would also say another movie that sort of does this. Again, I'm connecting the dots here, but give me a minute. Forrest Gump was like this in the sense that it's the character narrating their own life story. They're looking back on the past. They're saying, I did this and I did that. And I think in both Forrest Gump and A Christmas Story, the idea is that this character who's narrating, you just want to trust them. You want to believe that everything they're telling you is true. And they're really not giving you any reason despite the fact that, especially in Forrest Gump, some of the things he does seem pretty far-fetched, that they're good, they're good, honest, and wholesome at heart, and they're just sharing their life experience with you for whatever reason. And so I always, when I think of movie narrations, I sort of think of both The Christmas Story and Forrest Gump sort of in the same breath, because they sort of have that same kind of feel, that same kind of tone, like remembering a better time, remembering, my childhood, my upbringing. Obviously, A Christmas Story takes place over one Christmas, whereas Forrest Gump takes place over his whole life. But no, I think in both of those, I think it does the movie a favor by having it there. I think it helps contextualize it in a way that really just makes you want to believe it and feel the best of it.
All right. So what do you got for number 2?
All right. Number 2 is one of my more recent movies on the list, and that is Zombieland. And you think, really? That's your number 2 pick? So this stars Jesse Eisenberg and Woody Harrelson and woman whose name I can't remember, who just won 2 Oscars. Sorry, I'm just totally blanking on her name. And the idea is there's been a zombie apocalypse. You know me, I love post-apocalyptic movies as much or more than the next guy. So for those who haven't seen this movie, they did make a sequel. It was not nearly as good. Emma Stone, that's the name of the woman. Sorry, man, I can't believe I blanked on her name. The idea is that there's been a zombie apocalypse. There are only a handful of survivors, and Jesse Eisenberg. The movie follows Jesse Eisenberg's character, and he's the narrator. And so at the beginning of the movie, he sets it up, and he says, like, "Hey, we are in the zombie apocalypse," and he gives you the 5-minute breakdown of this is how we got here. And one of the things that I really found interesting about the way that they chose to do his narration is he's keeping these rules, the rules of surviving Zombieland. And every time he talks about a rule, text appears on the screen in giant 3D block letters to reinforce his rule. And then something usually happens in the movie that would indicate why this rule is important or how he came up with the rule. So like one of the rules he talks about, and one of his first rules was he says like, I think it was like rule number 2 is like cardio. And he goes, the first ones to go were the fatties. And then there's a scene where like zombies are running after overweight people and just catching them and eating them in the most violent and gory ways. And then like not 2 minutes later, there's a scene where he's being chased by a zombie through a parking lot and he's just running in circles, and it keeps showing on the screen. Rule number 2, cardio, ding, 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 ding. And it's flashing on the screen. Rule number 2, cardio, 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 as he's running and running and running around. And so through the course of the movie, every time funny things happen, he talks about like, oh, this is, rule number 5, always buckle your seatbelt. And then, of course, there's a zombie in the backseat of the car. So he slams on the brakes and the zombie just goes flying through the windshield. And then on the screen, it starts flashing seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelts. So they do a really neat job of taking what he's saying in the movie as his voiceover and visually displaying it on screen, both with the words themselves, but through the actions that are happening. And I just thought it was a clever way to take a genre that, who are we kidding, has been done, no pun intended, to death. And this came out like when Walking Dead was big. And so you have all these zombies everywhere, zombie movies, horror movies, spoof movies, comedy movies, action movies, gory thriller movies, zombies everywhere. It's like, how do you tell a zombie story in a way that's different than the 200 other zombie stories? Well, that's how they did it. They do it through it's I wouldn't say it's a comedy. It's got funny parts in it, but they don't take itself too seriously. But the voiceover idea and the way they present that through the course of the film, I think really adds something to this zombie movie that separates it from other zombie movies, makes it a better movie, and just does the narration in a very clever and creative way, and just does a lot of interesting things with it. So Zombieland's my number 2.
All right. My number 2, I'm going with Stand By Me from 1986.
Oh, solid pick.
I figure like what better way to bring a Stephen King short story to life than by having it narrated and like sort of read to you, and what a great choice of casting with Richard Dreyfuss. He was perfect for that. I love how at the end it's Gordy LaChance now growing up. Yeah. And he's an author because that's always what he wanted to be, right? And he's walking you through the story. Like it's kind of like a Christmas story, the same narrative device, right? Like looking back on their life. And I really like the end. Like when it goes from him narrating the story, then it changes and it gets you as the audience to watch him type the story on his computer.
Yeah.
And you go from hearing his spoken words to seeing the written words. And that final line, one of the best final lines in a movie ever, when he says, I've never had any friends later on like the ones I had when I was 12. And you think it's over. And you're like, what a powerful message. And then there's a pause and he types one final line. Jesus does anyone. And it's clear, like this story had nothing to do with seeing a dead body. It was about the friends you had when you were 12. This movie hits hard. It's way more now as an adult. And so like, it's like I relate to that, the adult in the story narrating it, I saw something posted online, by the way, recently, and it said something along the lines of like, at some point when you were a kid, you and your friends went outside to play together for the last time and nobody knew it.
Yeah.
It broke me, like where did those friends go? How do we lose touch with them? You will never have friends like that and you're never going to be a kid again. This whole movie is so damn good. But for me, it's the narration that puts it all over the top. It's just such an amazing way to tell a story and a damn good story too. So that's my number 2. So
yeah, and I like that idea that he's writing the book and narrating it at the same time. Like it's and you don't necessarily pick up on that immediately, but
you don't until the end. You realize, my God, he's writing this so good.
All right, so we're gonna move on to my number 1. Well, my number 2, well, Shawshank's my number 1, but, and so this is a movie that I hadn't seen in a long time. And when I was doing the homework for this podcast and I was doing some internet searches, this one kept coming up and coming up and coming up. And I thought, I don't remember this movie being that good. And it's been a long time. So I went back and watched it this week and I really liked it, and I'm really glad I did because I was able to make it the number one pick on our podcast here because I want to talk about it. And it's a movie called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Stars Robert Downey Jr. and Val Kilmer. Have you seen it? Do you know anything about it?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it. No.
Written and directed by Shane Black, who also did wrote Lethal Weapon, and it's so Robert Downey Jr.'s character is the narrator in this film, and the reason I put it as my number one, and the reason I enjoyed it so much when I watched it again last week was he's the narrator, but he does a terrible job of it. and he keeps messing things up. Like he'll start telling you something and go, wait. Okay, we're going to talk, I need to tell you about something else. And then the movie literally just like, it's almost like a needle scratch on a record. And it's like, okay, then they cut to another scene. And he goes, okay, I need to give you this context. And then even one point he goes, it's like when your dad telling you a bad joke. And then just when he gets to the punchline, he goes, oh, by the way, did I forget to tell you his horse is blue? And he's like, yeah, he goes, that's how bad I am at narrating. But even though he acknowledges he's a bad narrator, he still does it through the movie, and he continues to make mistakes. He continues to leave out details only to remember them much later. And you're like, oh, that probably would have been good to know before this happened, kind of thing. And it just adds another interesting element to the storytelling, because although the story is told in a linear fashion, the narration sort of gives you the sense that the story is being told a little bit out of order, because as things are happening, we don't necessarily understand what's happening or why it's happening. And you're sort of like, well, I'll figure it out. And then the narrator will tell you down the road, like, oh, remember when that happened? This is why we showed you that. And he sort of also breaks the fourth wall a little bit as he talks to you, not just as a viewer, but like, it's almost like he knows you're a viewer. And much like with Stand By Me, at the very end of the movie, he's making a recording. Like it's almost like he's doing a pitch for a movie or a screenplay, and he's like recording it into a camera, and you're like, oh, okay. So it wasn't even so much that he was breaking the fourth wall for us, the viewers. He's literally making a commentary for whoever it is he's pitching this story to. And this reminded me of other movies like Deadpool and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where in both of those movies there is some narration, and in both of those movies it's the character in the movie speaking to us directly by breaking the fourth wall. I didn't feel that sort of qualified as the narrator part of our podcast theme this week, so that's why I didn't have either of those two films on my list. But I mean, technically they both do have narration, but in both of those cases it's the character in the movie literally talking in character directly to the screen. Whereas with Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, it's just that voiceover. You never have Robert Downey's character sort of look at the screen and talk to you like, hey, I realize I'm in a movie. Although his narration sort of implies that in some points. And it's just an interesting detective story, much like Fletch, which we already talked about. When you're doing these detective stories, you sort of have to spell out some of the clues for the audience because you don't want them to fall too far behind, because then once you have that reveal, you want to make sure they get it. And this one was it was an all-around great movie. Like I said, I saw it probably 10 years ago, and I remember thinking at the time I didn't really like it. But I watched it again this week, and I liked it a lot. So if you haven't seen Kiss Kiss Bang Bang in a while, it's available here in Canada on Crave. It's quite good. It was a really good movie. And it's fun to see Robert Downey Jr. because this was like only a couple years before he did the first Iron Man movie. And from what I was reading in the trivia of this movie, they basically said when he went to audition for Iron Man, he leaned heavily on his characterization from this movie because he felt that that's sort of how Tony Stark would be that sort of confident, smug know-it-all. Although in this movie, he just pretends to be a confident, smug know-it-all. He doesn't actually have those skills. Doesn't have the skills to pay the bills. He keeps getting his ass kicked. So anyway, no, it was really good. So this is the number one movie I want to talk about for this podcast, for this theme, because of the way that I felt the narration was done in a very clever and creative way that you don't often see.
All right, I'm going to go with my number one from 1987, The Princess Bride.
Oh, of course. So good.
And one of the reasons I wanted to put this at the top was, for me, it kind of flips the narrator role on its head. Like, obviously, it's Peter Falk reading William Goldman's The Princess Bride to his grandson. But it's his reading of the book, it sort of seeps into the narrative structure of the film. Like I love where there's times when he just stops. And it reverts back to them sitting in the bedroom. And he's like, it's not too scary, is it? I could stop.
He doesn't die here, you know.
Yeah. It's so good. And Peter Falk's voice is just perfect for this movie, you know. And the idea of a man reading a book to his grandson and really by proxy reading the book to the whole audience, it's just Such a great way to tell a story. You know, have you ever read the book, Derek?
I have. Not I have read it. I had seen the movie a bunch of times before I read it. And I actually really, really enjoyed the book a lot. Like sometimes, you read a book after you've seen the movie and you're like, wow, there's a lot of stuff in here that didn't get in the movie. The book was a pretty, like the movie was a pretty faithful adaptation of the book. It was very faithful. There were a few little tidbits that they changed, but not a lot.
I read it to my son years ago. It's almost like word for word at times. Yeah. Faithful. It's really good. And it was funny because when William Goldman went to write that book, he had 2 daughters at the time. And he said to them, he goes, I'm going to write you a story. What do you want it to be about? And one of the daughters said a princess and the other one said a bride. So he's like, okay, that's the title. That's how he did it, And the way that the book is written, it's from the point of view of him, William Goldman, who also stops the story and interrupts things along the way, just like Falk does in the film. So I feel like watching this movie is like reading a book. It's amazing having it almost just the story is read to you. Like I said, he's not just reading it to Fred Savage, so he's reading it to us, So he's like the surrogate for everyone's grandfather reading them a book, and it's the perfect way to tell the perfect story, I think. So that's my number one. So
that's a good number one pick.
Yeah. All right. Okay. What do you say that we have some
fun with Caveman?
All right. So since we're talking about narrated movies today, I thought we could do a little something with voiceovers. Because that's what narration is, right?
Okay.
So here's what I'm going to do, Derek. I'm going to give you the name of a character and the title of the movie. You got to name the actor who does the voiceover for the character.
Oh, okay. I like
Sounds difficult, but it's actually super easy.
I like where this is going. Okay.
All right. So easy. Woody in Toy Story.
Oh, that's Tom Hanks.
Okay. How about who does the voiceover for Genie in Aladdin?
Which version?
1993's animated one.
That was Robin Williams.
It was. All right. How about Donkey in Shrek?
That was Eddie Murphy.
So everyone remembers Ellen DeGeneres was Dory in Finding Nemo, right?
Sure.
But who provided the voice of the lead role of Nemo's dad, Marlin?
Oh, that was Super Dave Osborne's brother, Albert Brooks.
Oh, yeah. Yes, Bob Einstein's brother.
Yeah.
One of the funniest humans that ever lived.
He's on TV every morning. I have him on while I'm doing my work in the mornings.
Which, by the way, makes Albert Brooks Albert Einstein. Yes, right. Of course. Yeah. All right. Who did Puss in Boots in Shrek 2?
Oh, that was Antonio Banderas.
How about Mufasa in The Lion King from 1994?
Oh, that was Darth Vader. That was the late great James Earl Jones.
Newer one for you, Rocket in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, the aforementioned Bradley Cooper.
Yeah. All right, who lent her sexy voice as Jessica Rabbit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
I have no idea.
Oh, it's Kathleen Turner.
Sure. I only ever watched that movie one time for this podcast, and I didn't really enjoy it.
Oh, man, you're messed up. You are a messed up guy, I tell you. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is great. Okay, who played Draco in Dragonheart from 1996?
That was that was Sean Connery, wasn't it?
Yes. All right, so you got James Earl Jones as Mustafa earlier in The Lion King, but can you name the actor that provided the voice of Scar in that movie?
That Scar was that wasn't the name of the little kid, right? That was the brother. That was the bad guy. Yeah. That was Jeremy Irons.
Oh, very well done. All right, who played the voice of Po in Kung Fu Panda?
Was Po the actual panda?
Yeah.
Oh, that was Jack Black. No. Yeah. Jack Black. We got it.
All right, who played Maui in Moana?
I don't know. I've never seen Moana.
It was Dwayne Johnson. I would have also accepted The Rock.
Yeah, sure.
All right, who played Mr. Incredible in The Incredibles?
Oh, that was Coach. What's his name? Oh my God, I'm blanking on his name. I want to say Judd something. I can't remember.
Craig T. Nelson.
Why did I think Judd something?
You were thinking Judd Nelson?
No, I knew that was right. That's what I was thinking. My brain went Nelson, and I'm like, that was the first Nelson that popped to my mind.
All right, well, I'll give you lots of easy ones. We're going to get a couple harder ones.
Those have all been pretty easy so far.
A little bit harder now, okay?
Okay.
Who played Samantha, the operating system, in Her?
Her. That's the one with Joaquin Phoenix, right?
Yes, it is.
Was that Scarlett Johansson?
Oh, very well done. All right, the last three ones here are a little hard, but we'll see if we can do it. Who played Desk Sergeant in the segment Harry Canyon, Dan in the segment Den in the segment Den, Robot in the segment So Beautiful and So Dangerous, in Heavy Metal?
Heavy Metal. Sorry, can you give me? I had no idea what movie you're talking about. Can you give me the list again now that I know we're talking about Heavy Metal?
Yeah, Heavy Metal from 1981. He played Desk Sergeant in the segment Harry Canyon. He played Dan in Den.
Yeah. Den
in the segment Den, and Robot in the segment So Beautiful and So Dangerous.
Was it John Candy?
Oh, well. Yes. All right. Smart guy. Who provided the voices of the two lead mice, Bernard and Miss Bianca, in Disney's The Rescuers from 1977?
Jeez. I haven't seen that movie since I was a little kid in 1977. Were they British? They were British, weren't they?
No, they weren't.
No? The Rescuers. I'm trying to think of who would have been big in the 70s as a voice. I have no idea. I have no idea.
It was Bob Newhart and Eva Gabor.
Sure.
And who voiced Templeton the Rat in 1973's Charlotte's Web? You know this one or you don't?
No, I mean, I have no idea. I can't even imagine what it sounds like.
It was Paul Lynde, the center square from Hollywood Squares.
I was going to say, I don't even know if I could identify that guy if you put him in a lineup.
You would. All right. All right, so you did pretty good. I wanted to get a couple of hard ones. Some easy ones in early, but, you know.
Yeah.
Harder.
No.
All right, so next time it's over to me to nominate a movie. One thing is, Derek, I'm always interested, I think, to see how some of these older movies hold up. It's kind of what we do around here, right? Mm-hmm. And I always feel like this is especially the case when it comes to movies that are like pop culture phenomenon. In regard to the time they came out, like some movies are just so rooted in the moment. It's hard to imagine them holding up over time. So, back in 1992, this movie wasn't the biggest box office hit of the year, but it was a total pop culture phenomenon. So I'm going to go back and watch it and see how it holds up today after 30 years. Any guesses what I'm talking about?
92.
Mm-hmm. Pop culture phenomenon movie.
I'm trying to think. I would have been in grade 12. 92.
I want to see how this movie holds up after 30 years or if it's just rooted in 1992. And the movie is Wayne's World.
Oh, good pick.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I've
actually watched this recently, so I'm looking forward to talking about it on the podcast. Yeah, no,
I'm interested to see how this movie holds up because at the time it was just a sensation, you know? So, that's what we're going to do. So we're going to watch Wayne's World. We're going to come back and we're going to review Wayne's World and see how it holds up after 30 years or if it's just like stuck in the past. It'll be interesting to see kind of how it plays out. But I tell you what, until then, I'm Chris McBrien. That's Derek Myers. And we both want to say thanks for taking the time to listen to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.